Mga kalikasang pagbati, mga katahanan. Andito ulit tayo sa ating episode ng Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, ang programang ng Faith Watch and Pagos Communication and CBCP Media Office. No? Itong Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home ay programa na tuwing linggo natin na premiere ang mga iba't ibang episodes at iba't ibang topic kung saan tayo po ay hinikayat na manood upang mas maintindihan natin ang tinuturo ng ating simbahan tungkol sa tamang pangalaga ng ating tahanan, ang sangnilikha. No? So ito po si Lou Arsenio, ang inyong host. At ako rin po ay coordinator ng Archdiocese of Manila Ministry of Ecology. No, at patuloy po tayong umaagapay, nagtuturo, at nagpapaalala sa inyong lahat na ang kalikasan ay ating tahanan. At siyempre, ngayong hapon na to, meron akong partner. Matagal ko na rin po siyang partner dito sa ating mga programa at lalo na sa pangalaga ng kalikasan dito po sa Archdiocese of Manila sa iba't iba pang mga nangailangan ng ating konting kaalaman. No? At ang ating bisita ngayon, ang ating partner ngayon ay siya ay si Sister Maria Vida Cordero. No? Please welcome her. She is actually a agriculture scientist at advocate at ito na yung kanyang, ayokong sabihin pinagkatandaan, kundi kalakihan. Makikita naman sa aming mga buhok, di ba? Okay, Sister, welcome to Laudato Si Care for Our Common Home, your first time here. So welcome po ang inyong pagbati sa ating mga tagapanood.
Magandang hapon po. Thank you, Lu. Thank you sa ginagawa ninyo, nating lahat ng simbahan para sa ating kapwa nilikha. So pagbati ng magandang araw sa lahat ng ating kapwa nilikha. Nasa buwan tayo ngayon ng pagbabalik tanaw, pagbabalik ng pagtatalaga sa ating pangangalaga sa kalikasan. June is an environmental day, month, and it is not only in our country, but it is a global celebration. Sana yung lahat ng kapaligiran, lahat ng kalikasan ay natutuwa dahil sa buwan na ito ay muli nating ibinabalik sa kamalayan ng nating lahat ang pangangalaga sa kalikasan. Salamat po sa pag-invite sa akin dito.
Ayan, Sister, simula lang ito. Hindi sanay si Sister, no? Pero masasanay din yan.
Ayoko na expose.
Masasanay din siya, no? So, ang ating programa ay Laudato Si. No? So, alam na natin na ang Laudato Si ay programang, ay encyclical, I should say, no? Encyclical ng Santo Padre o ni Pope Francis na pinapakita ang paano alagaan ang sangnilikha at hindi lang po ang kalikasan per se lang pinag-usapan dito, ngunit lahat na nakakonekta sa ating pamumuhay bilang kamanlilikha, no? So, kamanlilikha, sangnilikha, tahanan. Okay. So, kung matatanda, okay, ang Laudato Si ay ang encyclical o love letter ni Pope Francis sa sangnilikha, sa sanlibutan, sa lahat ng mga naninirahan sa isang tahanan na ito, no? At kung matandaan natin, nitong nakaraang linggo ay natapos ang isang taon na pag-aalala, paggunita sa ika-5 taong anibersaryo ng encyclical na ito, no? At kaya nga bilang pagtapos, minabuti natin na imbitahan yung isang kaibigan na nasa Global Catholic Climate Movement, siyang Associate Director, para magpaliwanag sa atin ano ba ang ecological conversion ng family, no? So, ano ba ang ecological conversion ng family? Paano ba mangyari ang ecological conversion ng family? At binahagi din niya yung kanyang karanasan, no? So, at ano ang panawagan ng Santo Papa para sa diriwang, no, nitong ika-5 taon ng Laudato Si at pagpasok sa ika-6 na taon ng encyclical, no? Kaya inimbitahan natin si Miss Christina Lianyo to share. At ito nga po ang kanyang maikli at napakayaman na mga kwento, no? So, panoorin po natin ang kanyang kinuwento.
All right, here we go. All right, so we see in Laudato Si, and today is actually the 6th anniversary of Laudato Si, May 24th, which is the date that you'll actually see in the encyclical. So happy anniversary, Laudato Si. And in the encyclical, Pope Francis talks about how the ecological crisis is not just something that's an economic crisis or a political crisis, but really at the heart of what's going on in terms of the climate change, the biodiversity crisis, is that it's a crisis of the heart, that it's a spiritual crisis. And this was an important contribution that the church and Pope Francis made to really get to the roots of what's going on. And so therefore, he says, in order to address our ecological crisis, we all need to have an ecological conversion. So we know conversion is at the heart of our faith. Conversion means to turn toward, to return to. So an ecological conversion is one in which we return to our Creator, our brothers and sisters, and also all of creation. And so here we see Pope Francis talk about the effects of our encounter with Jesus become evident in our relationship with the world around us. So it's this understanding that how we treat the environment, how we treat creation, has everything to do with our faith. But this understanding of ecological conversion wasn't new. St. John Paul II actually mentioned it in 2001 in his catechesis, where he also wrote and was concerned about the environment. He also was a great lover of nature. And he acknowledged the need to have this ecological conversion to become more sensitive and to address the environmental problems of our time. So this understanding of ecological conversion, this concern for creation, is nothing new. It's just that we have this beautiful encyclical that is focused on it, but it's really very much a part of our church teaching. And so what about families? In Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about the importance of families. This is a beautiful quote. He says, "In the family, we first learn how to show love and respect for life. We are taught to respect we were taught to respect for the local ecosystem and care for all creatures." And so here he's really mentioning kind of the primal role that families have, because families in many ways are the first place where we have our catechesis, right? It's in our families. And just as a follow-up, because ecological education can take place in a variety of settings. And he puts here in school and families, in catechesis and elsewhere. And good education plants seeds when we are young, and these continue to bear fruit throughout life. So when Atilu asked me to present, as I was starting to prepare for this, I was trying to think about what got me involved with environmental issues. So I've been an environmentalist since I was a child, and I can actually trace my roots to my parents. So as Atilu mentioned, my parents immigrated from the Philippines in the 60s, to the United States. And I was born and raised in Florida. And even though we were in the United States, my parents still held on to, strong, I would say, Filipino values, Catholic education, or Catholic faith, education, the role of family, and also the importance of giving back, of service. And I can remember from an early age, we would make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a local soup kitchen. And the message that my parents instilled in me was that, we need to give back. And in terms of, we give back because we are out of gratitude for all that we've been given. And so this understanding of kind of giving back was always a part of growing up, and that later on transferred through into my work and today. And this education that we have is both formal and informal. We think of education as being in a classroom and being in books, but actually education, particularly in families, happens informally. Children looking at their parents and noticing what they say, what they do, and these simple gestures, as Pope Francis says, in the family, this is where we learn simple things like, how do we say thank you, for, out of an expression of genuine gratitude? How do we control our greed? And that these simple gestures of heartfelt courtesy help to create a culture of shared life and respect for our surroundings. And in Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about how important is this simple gesture of just saying thank you when we sit down and eat, to be grateful for the food in front of us, to remember those who don't have any, and how even in that small gesture is a form of catechesis, and which can eventually lead to action, such as if we're grateful for our food, then we'll do our best not to waste it. And we know that food waste can be a really big problem for the environment. The other thing I was thinking about, again, in terms of informal transmission of ecological values in families, again, is in our purchasing. And again, even though we were in the United States, which has a strong culture of consumerism, I always noticed how my parents were a little different. Like if we went to the movies, we didn't buy things. We always brought food in our bags, or they were really cautious about, about purchases. And it really contrasted with some of my friends, and this kind of notion of simplicity and being cautious about like only, trying only to have what we need and so what we want. Again, important ecological values were being transmitted, not formally, but just in how my parents treated the environment. So again, the importance of family cannot be underscored. And then another important role that families have in educating their kids in relation to Laudato Si is instilling a love for nature. So a big, an important message in Laudato Si and in ecological conversion is this need to deepen our communion, our relationship with all creation, and to see that through creation, God is actually speaking to us. This is a beautiful quote from Laudato Si, where Pope Francis says, St. Francis, faithful to scripture, invites us to see nature as a magnificent book in which God speaks to us and grants us a glimpse of his infinite beauty and goodness. So I grew up in Florida. I grew up on the water, and we moved to Florida because my dad, having grown up in Mindanao by the water, wanted to also live by the water, remembering his Filipino roots. He actually gave up a really good job in Pennsylvania, but he couldn't handle the snow and wanted to be in warmer weather that reminded him of home. And because we lived by the water, I was exposed to all of these beautiful creatures. And in many ways too, my becoming an environmentalist had everything to do with spending time outdoors and being with creation. And I began to do environmental projects when I was in school, in middle and high school. And I can remember thinking like, why do I do this? Why do I do this? And I remember thinking, oh, it's because you want to love and care for what you know. You know, it was so simple, but that unless you know something and love it, you know, you won't want to care for it. But really, those are the roots. And so as families, how can we cultivate that communion with the environment? Because that too is part of the ecological conversion, to see creation, spending time in nature as part of our spiritual life. And that was a really big revelation for me in Laudato Si, because I was always a lover of nature, but I didn't realize that my being in nature could actually be part of my prayer life. But Laudato Si and Pope Francis really articulates how that is possible. And he even says in the encyclical how important it is to revisit these places from our youth that inspire us. Here is a quote from Laudato Si. He says, "The history of our friendship with God is always linked to particular places which take on an intensely personal meaning. We all remember places, and revisiting those memories does us much good. Going to these places is a chance to recover something of their true selves." So as parents, we have a real opportunity to be sources of catechesis around concern for the environment and to support our families and our children in ecological conversion. But this teaching and learning goes both ways. As children, many young these days are very aware of the ecological challenges. There's climate strikes around the globe that have been inspired by the teenager Greta Thunberg, and youth around the globe have been rising up because they're concerned about their future. And in Laudato Si, Pope Francis recognizes that. He says, young people demand change. They wonder how anyone can claim to be building a better future without thinking of the environmental crisis and the sufferings of the excluded. So part of what it means for ecological conversion to happen in the families is to also listen to the youth, to perhaps listen to hard realities of they might be speaking out because of their awareness, but also because of their concern for their own future. And I can remember, even though my parents were very much around simplicity, they didn't have a lot of education around the environment. And so when I began to learn about things like recycling, I began to tell my parents, and they began to recycle. And that's become their own practice. And they would often tell me, they would go on trips in their car, and they would be like 2 weeks, they'd be on the road, and in the back, they would collect the recycling, because this was when recycling bins weren't readily available. And they would tell me proudly, they're like, look, Christina, we're recycling, we're not throwing this out because of you. And so how can we as parents, and also a parent, really listen to and be open to any messages from our own children? So this catechesis of ecological conversion can go both ways. So families are important in this role, in this journey of ecological conversion. So I'm going to skip this, and just to want to mention an important role that we can play too is around consumption. And in many ways, in Laudato Si, we hear about how the roots of our environmental crisis are emerging because of our overconsumption. And in Amoris Laetitia, which was a letter of Pope Francis, he talks about, again, the importance that the family can play around consumption. And again, this has to do with how just our values and where we think we find true joy. So I want to switch now just to share a little bit about kind of as I mentioned, Pope Francis, the church sees the importance of families in this ecological conversion. And so now we have tomorrow, as part of the Laudato Si anniversary year, there's going to be a launch of the Laudato Si Action Platform. It's a soft launch, which will invite institutions, including families, on a 7-year journey to total sustainability in the spirit of Laudato Si. So we know that ecological conversion process takes months, years, really a lifetime. And so this journey will allow these institutions, we have at the top families, dioceses, schools, universities, hospitals, businesses, religious orders will be supported and encouraged to enter this journey. And so the Laudato Si Action Platform will have 3 pillars. The first pillar will be plans. So what this means for families is that there will be an opportunity and invitation for families to discern, to pray, and reflect on what actions they want to take. And these plans should be completed in no more than 7 years. So the first part of the platform is about developing plans and implementing them. The second part of the platform is resources. So the platform will provide practical resources for action. They will mostly be sourced from local organizations. So there's a lot of organizations in the Philippines that are doing ecological work. So we'll be sourcing from them. So if you're looking for a table grace for Laudato Si, you'll be able to go to the platform and find a resource. And as well, if you work with an environmental organization, you can also submit your resources to the platform so that they can be used globally, because again, this platform will be used by communities around the globe. And then the third pillar is community, because Pope Francis talks about how ecological conversion must be a communal conversion, that we really need to transform our communities. And in addition, we can't do this ecological conversion work alone because it's hard. It requires sacrifice, it requires discipline and resources. And so how can we support each other? And so this platform will help to build community both globally through online chat forums and sharing of stories around the globe, but also locally by having how-to guides about how to talk to your children about Laudato Si, how to talk to your pastors, how to encourage families to reach out to neighbors. So it will also encourage all of us to cultivate community. And this platform will be based on 7 Laudato Si goals. These goals will help redefine and rebuild our relationship with each other and our common home. And their holistic approach acknowledges the planetary limits of our socioeconomic systems and the human roots of the ecological crisis. They call for spiritual and cultural revolution to realize integral ecology. So I'll just mention, I'll briefly just talk about each one of these goals. So as part of so when you're developing your plans, you need to develop plans around each of these goals, because what's called for is a holistic and integral approach. And all of these goals help to create that holistic response to our ecological and social crises. So the first goal has to do with responding to the cry of the earth. It's the call to protect our common home for the well-being of all, as we actively address the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and ecological sustainability. So it's about looking at ways we can support biodiversity, maybe by planting native trees, planting native gardens, removing invasive species, but looking at ways to respond to the cry of the earth. Responding to the cry of the poor is the call to promote eco-justice, aware that we are called to defend human life from conception to death. So this could mean many things, including promoting educational events or promoting and protecting Indigenous leadership or growing in solidarity with vulnerable people. So I should mention that the Laudato Si Action Platform will actually give you concrete suggestions of activities that families will be able to do under each of these goals. Of course, you can come up with your own, but the platform is supposed to help kind of give you structure and guidance about how you can respond to each of these. Ecological economics is about acknowledging how the economy is a subsystem of human society, which itself is embedded within our common home, this biosphere. So it could be about ensuring, building and supporting a circular economy by launching trading communities, or practicing fair and sustainable purchasing, or ensuring the dignity of workers. So many different ways to support ecological economics. Adoption of simple lifestyles is pretty straightforward, but looking at ways of how we use our energy, our transportation, and even what we eat to support a healthy climate and healthy environment. Ecological education is about looking at ways that we can incorporate Laudato Si into all forms of education.
So, sister, ang si Christina ay napakayaman yung kanya binahagi. So, sinabi niya no na kinuot niya yung Laudato Si 217. No, sinabi ni Pope Francis, ang ecological conversion ay epekto nung ating pakikipag-ugnayan sa Diyos, no? Kay Jesus. So, kung titingnan po natin, tapos sinabi pa niya, ikinuwento niya yung kanyang, paano siya, no, bilang Pilipinang, Filipinang Amerikana. Pinanganak sa pamilyang Pilipino sa US. No? So, yung kultura, no, imagine mo yon, no? So, ano sa tingin mo, sister? What do you think? Anong iyong take dito sa kinuwento ni Christina, no? At of course sa message ni Pope Francis sa Laudato Si.
Maganda yung alaala na binahagi sa atin ni Christina. At sa aking palagay, ito talaga yung pamana ng bawat pamilya sa mga bata. Yung pamanang hindi nawawala, hindi nauubos, yung pamanang hindi pwedeng kainin ng mga insekto, kung hindi yung pamanang alaala. At yung pamanang, sabi ni Christina, sa pamilya niya natutuhan ang pagbabahagi, ng biyaya, sa pamilya nagsimula ang kanyang buhay panalangin, yung prayer life niya, yung pagsasabi ng thank you, pagiging grateful, at yung simula ng kanyang kamalayan tungkol sa pangangalaga sa kalikasan tulad ng hindi pagsasayang ng pagkain. Noon pa man sa bawat pamilya, yan na ang palaging sinasabi ng mga magulang. At nakakatuwa na kahit na nasa ibang bansa na si Christina, yun pa rin yung naaalaala niya, na dala-dala niya. Kaya siguro sa ating lahat sa mga pamilya, magandang ibalik natin yung ganong pagtuturo. Huwag magsasayang ng pagkain, ilalagay ang mga bagay sa tamang tapunan, at yung naggagarden, yung bawat pamilya. Yun yung simula, sabi niya, yung simula ng exposure niya to nature, communion with the environment, ay nagsimula sa kanyang pamilya. Kaya mapalad si Christina kasi meron siyang ganoong alaala na pamana ng kanyang magulang. Sa aking palagay, yung lahat ng mga pamilya, lahat ng mga magulang na nakikinig sa atin, mga bata, yan ang totoong pamana ng ating mga pamilya. Kapag ngayon magkakasama tayo, sama-sama tayong nagbabahagi na ng biyaya ng buhay, at yung kahit na hiwa-hiwalay na tayo, sa iba't ibang paraan ng pagkakahiwa-hiwalay, meron pa rin bumibigki sa ating lahat. Kung hindi yung alaala ng pinagmulan ng ating kamalayan, lalong-lalo na sa pangangalaga sa kalikasan. Ayun.
So parang sister, parang in-affirm din yun, no, nung next yung isang encyclical pa ni Pope Francis na Amoris Laetitia, no, kung saan sinasabi na ang paghubog talaga sa pamilya para maging tagapangalaga ng kalikasan ay kumbaga nanggaling sa pamilya. Paghubog sa bata o sa miyembro ng pamilya, manggaling sa pamilya. So, titingnan natin yung mga pamilya natin ngayon. Nandiyan pa ba sa consciousness natin yung turuan ng tamang asal, respeto, no? Hindi lang sa respeto kasi respeto sa mga nakakatanda, of course, mahalaga din yun, pero yung respeto sa lahat ng may buhay. No?
Respeto sa kapwa-tao at saka sa kapwa nilikha.
Yes. Kasi kamang lilikha din tayo ng Diyos, pero ibig sabihin, pero may responsibilidad tayo. Kasi kaya nga kumbaga, kung naituro kaya at kumbaga na dikdik sort of sa bawat pamilya sa mga anak yung value na to, no? Na ang sangnilikha, ang kalikasan ay dapat din protektahan, alagaan at respetuhin kasi may layunin ang Diyos kung bakit niya ito nilikha may purpose sila lahat. So kung yung ganong klaseng pagpapahalaga ay naituro, no, sa mga bata at naisabuhay din, inaisip kasi mahirap yung magsalita lang, di ba? Kasi madalas parang natutunan ito sa mga schools, no? Pero of course, pag nasa school ka, yung concern mo grades.
Maganda yung
no?
maganda kasi yung yung hobby ng buhay. Yung hobby ng buhay natin na konektado, ugnay-ugnay sa panahon, yung kung paano tayo kumikilos ngayon, kung paano tayo nagdadasal, ang relasyon natin sa Diyos na lumikha at sa kanyang mga nilikha na nasa ating kapaligiran ay nasa isang hobby ng buhay, dugtong-dugtong at ugnay-ugnay. Ayun. Yung
So
maraming
yung hobby, sister, yung hobby is meaning the weave of life.
the weave, yeah. Yes,
okay.
weave of life, hobby ng
Weave o
buhay.
web? Ano ba? Web.
Hobby.
The web of life, ano ba?
Yung
Na
web.
weaving kasi yung
Oo.
the web of
Oo.
life. Pwede rin yung weave kasi weaving is di ba?
Yes.
Pagdugtong,
We are
pagkukonek-connect.
weaving. Yes.
We are weaving, okay? So, yun.
Lalo na yung Pilipinas kasi marami tayong mga wini-weave. Banig, 'di ba? Basket, mga tela, mga project. Kaya hindi hiwalay 'yon. Kaya napakahalaga ng bawat pamilya kung ano yung magiging alaala ng mga bata sa kanilang paglaki. Na kahit saan sila pumunta, dala-dala nila yung relasyon na itinuro sa kanila, binahagi ng pamilya, sa Diyos, relasyon sa kapaligiran, relasyon sa kapwa-tao, at relasyon, lalong-lalo na kasama sa sarili, yung pagrespeto sa sarili. Habang nakikita natin na may mga pamilya ngayon na abalang-abala, paghahanap buhay, minsan nakakalimot, may magandang binahagi si Christina, yung sinabi niya ng the youth of today are becoming more aware. Nagiging mas nakikita yung pagmamalasakit ng mga kabataang namumulat upang bumuo ng mas magandang kapaligiran, mas magandang kinabukasan para sa kanila sa pamamagitan ng pangangalaga ng kalikasan. Ayun, kaya sabi niya ito, nagsulat ako, naka-all capital yung sinulat ko na sinabi ni Christina, listen to the youth. Ayun, no? Pakinggan natin sila.
Okay, so maganda yan, listen to the youth. So, una, yung mga bata ay dapat nahubog sa pamilya, no? Ayon kay Pope Francis nga na lahat kaya nga napakahalaga, no? Kahit na sa ating pag-launch ng Santo Papa ng 7 Laudato Si goals, ang inuna niyang sektor or grupo na dapat ay magsimula nitong 7 goals of Laudato Si na tinalakay na rin namin dito ng nakaraang episodes ay yung pamilya. Kasi basic nga doon ang galing, no? Kaya this year, ngayong taon na to ay paghahanap, paggagabay, pagtuturo na magkaroon ng Laudato Si family. At mula sa Laudato Si family, yung mga kabataan na pag-asa ng bayan at ng creation natin na sinasabi ni Christina, listen to the youth, sila din yung inasahan natin na magiging katuwang, no? At magiging tagapangalaga, tagapagpatupad sa pagdating ng panahon. At kaya itong lahat ng ginagawa nating mga seniors talaga, identified na, tanggap na yung
We owe it to them.
So, kailangan maipasa natin sa kanila kasi hindi naman natin to hindi man to natin ipapamana pero tayo po ay nanghiram lang sa kanila, no? As a famous adage would say, no, na we did not borrow it from we are not in the children are not in receiver of inheritance but rather sila yung hiniraman lang natin sila.
Sila yung may-ari ng kinabukasan.
No? So lahat ng mga next generations ang may-ari ng sangnilikha. Kaya nga ang huling tanong ni Christina doon sa kanyang talk ay anong klaseng mundo ang gusto nating iwan sa mga kabataan? At yun din ang tanong ni Pope Francis. Kung talagang mahal, kaya nga challenge natin, kung talagang mahal natin ang ating mga anak, mga apo, at ang mga sunod na mga lahi natin, ano ang ating dapat gawin? We are late in the day kung tutuusin natin.
Actually, yung panawagan na ecological conversion, yung ginagawa na yan dati ng mga pamilya. Medyo nawala lang dahil naging abalang-abala sa paghahanap buhay, sa kahirapan ng buhay. No, kailangan lang natin yung ibalik. Katulad halimbawa, may malaking pinag-uusapan ngayon, bahagi din ng ecological conversion, mga ekonomista na nagsasabi ng circular economy. Hindi ba dati naman sa pamilya, yung mga hand-me-down na mga damit, natutuwa na tayo pag pinapamanahan tayo ng mga gamit, ng mga damit ng mga ate, mga kuya natin, kahit na ibang kamag-anak dati, no? So yung umiikot na siya dati yung mga gamit, yung hiraman, bigayan, pasa-pasa, no? Hindi extractive. Kaya pwede lang natin yun ibalik. Kasi hindi naman nakakahiyang gawin yun. Dahil yun ay bahagi ng buhay ng pamilya, bahagi na rin yun ng yung sinasabi ngayon na binigyan ng malaking pangalan na circular economy. Pero kayang-kaya talaga ng pamilya yon. Kahit na nga yung mga paggagarden, paghahalamanan, ginagawa na rin dati ng pamilya. So, ngayon ibinabalik natin, circular. Yon. Kasi ganun ang ginawa ng Diyos sa ating sistema ng kalikasan ay paikot-ikot. Yon.
Yan. So, maganda, no? Kaya, sister, simpleng kwentuhan, pero malalim ang ating binabalikan na hindi naman bago sa atin lahat, no? Alam ko yung mga nanonood, mga pamilyang nanonood or nakikinig sa atin, no? Alam ko maka-identify po kayo, no? Na ang kalikasan ay walang basura. Ang kalikasan ay nagbibigay sa atin ng buhay, at kung mamatay yung isang halaman, babalik uli yun, sisibol uli yun, at magbibigay uli sa atin ng ating pangailangan. So that's circular economy. That's natural economy. That's economy of nature. At ito yung ecological economy din na sinasabi ng Laudato Si, isa sa 7 goals ng Laudato Si. At yung sinabi ni sister na tumanggap tayo, yung tayong mga nakakabata, tayong susunod na gagamit ng damit ng mga nakakatanda nating kapatid, no? Yung mga hand-me-down. So that's practice na po natin 'yan. Ngayon kaya yung kabataan, no, pagtanggapin po natin yung pinaglakihan ng ating mga kuya or ate, tatanggapin po ba natin? O gusto natin ba paraming bago? So tingnan po natin. So isa sa mga panawagan na sa goals ay adapt a simple lifestyle.
Yes.
So, adapt a simple lifestyle, no? So, and then, yung circular economy na sinasabi, ecological economy po yon, tawag doon sa Laudato Si goals, no? At yung sinabi, magbabahagi tayo, listen to the youth, because we need to communicate, no? We need to communicate, we need to go out and be with the community at mag-participate sa mga pagbabago na dapat gawin ng bawat isa, no? So, lahat ito yun, kung tutingnan natin ang 7 Laudato Si goals, nandun, ginagawa na natin. Pero ang tanong ngayon, kumusta na ang ating mga pamilya? So, sa ating talakayan ngayon, ecological conversion of family, malaking salita lang po yon. Pero ibig sabihin lang nun, pagbabalik loob natin sa nasira nating ugnayan sa sangnilikha, no? Na bahagi dapat ito sa ating i-confess, no? Na kasalanan din po yon, dahil pag sinira natin, ang next generation ay tinanggalan natin ng karapatan sa sangnilikha.
Kasi nakakat yung cycle.
O yun.
Hindi umiikot.
Ayan. Yun, nakakat ang cycle. So, we have to respect. Kaya nga, meron ngayong pakiisa tayo sa panawagan rights of nature. Kasi may karapatan sila dahil may purpose ang Diyos. Bakit nilikha ito? So, Laudato Si mi Signore, no? Kaya para sa ating mga tagapanood, at of course, huwag niyong kalimutan na kayo mag-subscribe, mag-like, At i-share din ninyo para mas marami makapanood at mas marami makaalam at matuto. Dahil panahon na po, we have few years to go bago maging irreversible ang ating mundo, ang krisis na ating nararanasan sa mundong ito. Kaya matindi ang panawagan ng Santo Papa. Family should be ecologically converted. Schools, parishes, no? Lahat ng sektor dahil tulong-tulong po tayo. Okay? So, sister, yung iyong last pamanang paalala.
Oo. Dahil ang Laudato Si ay mula sa tula at awit ni San Francisco. At ang topic natin ngayon ay pamilya. At ang isang gustong-gusto natin, ang pamilya, pamilyang Pilipino, ay yung Belen. Diba? Pag Pasko, ang unang gumawa ng Belen ay si San Francisco. Ang banal na pamilya, Sagrada Pamilya, kasama ang mga hayop, ang mga tanim, ang kalikasan, at sana mula sa ating pamilya, sa loob ng tahanan, ay mabuo natin ang pamilya ng lahat ng nilalang ng Diyos. Magkakaugnay po tayong lahat, gumawa tayo ng mabuting pamilya sa loob ng tahanan, at pagdugtong-dugtungin natin ang mga pamilya natin kasama ang pamilya ng sangkalikasan. So, marami pong salamat.
Ayan, si Sister Maria Vida Cordero, siya po ay marami po yan siyang hats na at siya isa sa mga consultant po natin sa Archdiocese of Manila. At formator din siya ng ating maraming ng mga volunteers, no? So maraming salamat, sister, sa iyong pagpaunlak. So ito po si Lou Arsenio, ang inyong host, at Laudato Si Mi Signore. Patuloy po tayo manood at sumubaybay sa programang ito dahil malayo pa po yung ating tatahakin sa pag-aaral, sa pagkwentuhan tungkol sa tamang pangalaga ng sangnilikha, ang ating nag-iisang tahanan. Please subscribe, like sa Faith Watch at share. Maraming salamat at makakalikasang pagbati sa lahat. At Happy World Environment Month.
Yes.
Let us make our Environment Month starting tomorrow, World Environment, starting this week, World Environment, at maging productive sana tayo sa ating pangalaga sa kalikasan.
Salamat.